This is the list of the world's richest men according to Forbes, as of the publication date, topped by Bernard Arnault, fashion and luxury magnate, Elon Musk, owner of Tesla, SpaceX, and X, and Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon. However, their fortunes, close to $200,000 million, pale in comparison to the immense wealth of this gentleman here, John Davidson Rockefeller. Some argue that his inflation-adjusted net worth today would be $340,000 million, practically double that of Jeff Bezos. The question is, how on earth did this gentleman amass such a fortune in an era of civil war when millionaires didn't even exist? The short answer is that he was a man with secrets. The long answer is in this video. John Davidson Rockefeller was first born in Richford, a small town in the state of New York, in 1839. To put us at the time, a world where slavery persisted in many parts of the world, working conditions were extremely precarious and women lacked of basic rights. His father, William Rockefeller Senior, defined himself as a swindler. He presented himself as a botanical physicist and was dedicated to selling supposed magical elixirs. In addition to this, he was also dedicated to making loans to farmers, but he only gave them to those he knew could not pay, and then kept his farm, a true visionary. The man even secretly had another family, and he even tricked his children whenever he could, according to him, to make them smarter. Thus, John grew up as someone reserved, methodical, and discreet. He began earning money in his early teens, selling chips and jelly beans to his classmates, and doing some jobs for county residents. One night when he was 12 years old, a family friend came to visit old William to ask for a loan of $50 for the next harvest. The father had no money, but John did. He lent the farmer the $50 with 7% annual interest, recovering $53.50 the following year. It may not seem like much, but that inflation-adjusted money would be about $1,800 current dollars. At age 14, the family moved to Cleveland. John enrolled in a 10-week business course where he learned accounting. There he learned to keep detailed accounts of expenses and income in a book, a skill he would use throughout his life. But his father ran away with his second wife to Canada, and Rockefeller had to look for work without finishing his studies to help his mother without money. He went to work as an accountant's apprentice at age 16, and by age 18, he was already earning around $600 a year in that business. Although for many young people of the time this salary would be enough, for John it was not. He asked for a $200 raise, but was denied. So he quit and decided to start his own business. In 1859, with a business school partner, Morris Clark, he decided to open his own food and raw materials trading company, borrowing $1,000 from his father at 10% interest to start the business. In 1859 and 1860, they made profits of $4,400 and $17,000 respectively. Things were going well for Rockefeller, and just when they were closer to their goal of earning $100,000, in 1861, the Civil War broke out in the United States. John Rockefeller, like other businessmen of the time, avoided going to war by paying others to go fight on his behalf. This period was key in his career, as the war caused his business to explode. Union troops needed food and supplies, just what Rockefeller could offer. Things were going quite well for the young 24-year-old Rockefeller, and before the war ended, he ventured into another booming business, oil. In 1865, after the war, the federal government was interested in all cities being completely illuminated both day and night to avoid fights, robberies, or even riots or civil wars. To do this, the cities needed kerosene, a petroleum derivative, to keep the flames of the old lamps lit. And once again, Rockefeller took advantage of the opportunity, and together with his partner, Morris Clark, and the chemist Samuel Andrews, they began to exploit oil and to produce that kerosene in Cleveland. The kerosene business turned out to be very profitable. For every 5 barrels of oil, 3 of kerosene were obtained. While other refiners were discarding the 2 leftover barrels, Rockefeller found ways to make the most of them. He used the gasoline for the refinery, and with the rest he produced other byproducts, such as paraffin for candles, lubricants for railway and industrial gears, and Vaseline. In 1868, he joined the company as investor Henry Flagler, and together they created Rockefeller, Andrews and Flagler, which later became known as Standard Oil. Young John was not content to simply own an oil company. He wanted to own the largest and only oil company. Therefore, his idea was to acquire all the refineries in Cleveland, which at that time was one of the main oil centers in the United States. His tactics were quite questionable. Since the gasoline engine did not yet exist, all goods and raw materials were transported by trains. So, he initially focused on controlling all the trains. In 1871, Rockefeller made a pact with the train companies to create the South Improvement Company, which united the interests of the railroad companies with the monopolistic interests of Standard Oil. This worked in the following way. Rockefeller assured the railroads of a constant and abundant flow of barrels and, in exchange, they gave him a discount on the price of transportation. If the price was $2.56 for each barrel transported, the discount could reduce it to $1.50. In addition to this, Rockefeller obtained a second privilege with the agreement. If these trains transported oil that was not from Rockefeller and his partners, the railroads would have to pay Standard Oil $1.06 for each barrel they transported. Of course, this commission was added to the price of transportation, which meant that Rockefeller's competitors had to pay practically double for each barrel transported. Thus, Rockefeller could lower prices so much that his competitors could not compete. In fact, the dark part of Rockefeller's strategies was that he did not want competitors. He wanted to eliminate them all from the map. Proof of this was the third privilege that he had obtained through his deal with the railroads. Rockefeller had access to the accounts of all of his competitors thanks to the fact that he had access to the inventories of all the barrels of oil transported by the trains. In 1872, the conquest of Cleveland, also known as the Cleveland Massacre, took place. For 4 months, a Machiavellian John Rockefeller went from refinery to refinery with Standard Oil accounting data, telling owners to sell their property to him or prepare for war. If they didn't sell, he would lower the prices further and further until they were all bankrupt, and then he would buy them at public auction. During this year, Standard Oil purchased 22 of Cleveland's 26 refineries. By then, it controlled a fifth of the entire United States oil production. In 1874, through a private agreement, Rockefeller acquired the last refinery they did not control in Cleveland. Rockefeller acted true to his belief that competition was a sin. During the same year that Rockefeller was purchasing all of Cleveland's oil, owners of oil wells and refineries in western Pennsylvania began to notice that their shipments were becoming more expensive. They decided to stand up to it and created a union called Petroleum Production, which sought higher prices per barrel of oil and cheaper rail freight. The first measure was to not open any more wells for the next 60 days, not to work on Sundays, and not to sell crude oil to anyone who had anything to do with the South Improvement Company. They also sent committees to the state legislature and the United States Congress. Finally, they got the railroad companies to cancel contracts and dissolve the South Improvement Company. This should have been a setback for Rockefeller. But the reality is that, even after the South Improvement Company was dissolved, Rockefeller continued to have preferential treatment with the train companies, both in terms of discounts and confidential information. For many years, Rockefeller consolidated his control over the oil business. His monopoly strategy continued to advance. In that process, Rockefeller managed to eliminate many of his competitors. He had aggressive tactics, but also all kinds of inside information and preferential agreements with the railroad companies. As the years passed, his hold on the American oil industry became more and more unbreakable. Rockefeller continued to act quickly, this time founding the National Transit Pipeline Company and began acquiring rights of way for oil pipelines. And now Tidewater Pipe Company, in charge of pipe rates and refining, became his strongest competition. And as we know, Rockefeller had well-known tactics for dealing with his competitors. In this case, he bribed some Tidewater shareholders to hinder the company from within. When Tidewater attempted to apply for a loan, these bribed shareholders intervened in the bank, advising against approval by falsely claiming that Tidewater was on the verge of bankruptcy. They even attempted a coup on the company, but failed. Finally, Rockefeller opted for the easy solution. He bought the shares of these bribed shareholders, regardless of the price to pay. At the next shareholders' meeting, Rockefeller arrived with his $200,000 in shares of this company, saying to make it easier for them on pipeline rates and the price of refining. Tired of the struggle, Tidewater's other shareholders finally relented and became allies of Standard Oil. However, Standard Oil's expansion throughout the United States faced a serious problem. Each state had its own laws, which complicated the oil company's overall operations. To overcome this obstacle, the Standard Oil Trust was founded in 1882, a conglomerate of companies from every state in the country, all owned by Rockefeller and his partners. In 1876, Nicholas Otto invented the internal combustion engine, and in 1885 the Benz patent motor wagon, the first automobile to run on gasoline, was sold. Although the first American automobile, the Wick Model Besson, would not be built until 1904, the rise of the automobile industry was a blessing for Rockefeller. Every barrel of oil could be put to maximum use, as gasoline, previously of no significant use, became an essential component in the new automobile world of the 20th century. During that decade, shipments of cotton, tobacco, trains, hospitals, among others, multiplied. These movements were technically strategies to legally exercise control over monopolies that already existed. However, the United States, at least in theory, was the land of free markets and business competition. And a monopoly like Rockefeller's, which controlled 90% of oil exports and had 70 companies under its command, went against the spirit that the country promoted. For this reason, in 1890 the Sherman Antitrust Act was enacted, which declared illegal all agreements, conspiracies, cartels or trusts that limited free trade in the United States. Although this law seemed designed to end the Rockefeller empire, it was not enforced for some years. It was not until 1911, 22 years after its enactment, that Standard Oil was finally dissolved into several companies. Rockefeller and the other shareholders received shares in these resulting companies. Despite the dissolution of the monopoly, Rockefeller became even richer, thanks to the increase in demand for gasoline caused by the rise of the automobile. Although he did not fulfill his youthful promise to live to 100 years, Rockefeller almost fulfilled it. On May 23, 1937, at the age of 97, He died in Ormond Beach, Florida. His legacy as one of the oil industry's most influential tycoons endures to this day.